breaking and entering, drunk and disorderly, law and order. A former prosecutor and a defence lawyer, not your typical pairing. And the result? Conversations about crime and punishment that are guaranteed to get you thinking.
Welcome to Justice Matters, a weekly podcast. Our episodes are available every Monday on Apple Podcast, Spotify and YouTube. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok. Enjoy the episode. This episode contains descriptions of murder, rape and violence. Listener discretion is advised. Hello Lizzie, how are you?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. So in a number, for all of our regular listeners, they might recall that I mentioned ballistic evidence, in episodes every now and again.
Yes.
And we've never really sort of talked about it.
Delved into it.
Well, probably because I'm not a huge expert on it, but I do think it's a very interesting area and an area ripe for miscarriage of justice. So I wanted to look at some ballistic evidence, but through the lens of a very interesting case.
So hold on. Ballistic evidence.
Yes.
Is that evidence of guns?
Guns.
Okay.
I don't know the official definition of it, but let's just say it's about guns.
Yes, all right. So bullets and casings.
Bullets, yes.
All of
Yeah,
that
you're
stuff.
on it. Yeah.
I told you I read a lot of James Patterson,
okay.
Lee Child.
Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, well, you might be able to help me out with some of the science then. All right, so we're doing another historic case, which...
Is that because you're old?
Well, I'm not that old. This murder occurs in January of 1941, so before my mother was born. But anyway, so very old case, and I am interested in it because because I'm old, there's a movie in 1987 called White Mischief. It was based on a book called White Mischief, which is the book that I read for today's episode, amongst other things, and it is about the murder of the Earl of Erroll.
Okay. Can I just say, sidebar, I just read a thing yesterday that said in 6 years, the 80s will be 50 years ago.
Oh, stop it.
Isn't that ridiculous?
Yeah, I know.
Anyway.
Seems like only yesterday. The Earl of Erroll, which I just think is the weirdest name.
Yes.
But there are some odd names in this story. So the Earl of Erroll, he goes, well, if you met him, you'd have to call him my lord probably, or
in
Lord
the 80s?
Erroll. No. This is happening in the 40s.
Oh,
the movie's in the 80s.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah, the Earl of Erroll, he gets murdered. And... as it turns out, that was the first murder of a lord in sort of like 400 years or something.
How old was he? Do we know?
When he was murdered, he was in his early 40s.
Oh, so young.
Yeah, he was. He was a dashingly handsome cad, one might say, as you'll find out.
Oh, dear.
Yes. And I'll give you a brief rundown then. Okay, so he is, it all takes place in Kenya, in Africa, on the continent of Africa, and it takes place in the 40s. But I won't go through much of the story, but the British colonists really arrived there in early part of the 20th century, and then start farming and have this colonial lifestyle where they are working very hard as farmers, but also have a pretty
cushy,
pretty active social life. And
weren't they all quite well off?
Very well.
Yes.
Well, often. But it did tend to be a place where people who were sort of out of favour in England would go, or they were trying to escape debts. And so it did end up with these sort of...
reprobates?
Yeah, some reprobates. And a very, sort of... it's all farming and all very simple, but then they have these lavish parties and they try and recreate sort of the life they have in England out in Kenya.
Is that where The Little Princess, that book,
Oh, I don't know that one.
Mm.
Well, it's where another book, which I'm sure you've heard of, set called Out of Africa.
Oh, yes.
So by Karen Blixen. So she is in Africa from 1914, I think, to about 1931. And so the book Out of Africa that she writes is about this period in Kenya. And in fact, some of the people in the book are people in this murder story.
Wow.
She knew them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think probably had a relationship possibly with the Earl of Erroll. He was, as I said, he was a cad. Yeah.
My goodness.
So that Out of Africa is that.
Right at that time.
Yeah, and again, a movie Out of Africa.
Yeah.
So again, from the 80s. Robert Redford, Meryl Streep. Don't tell me you haven't seen it.
Of course. Yeah, I've seen it.
It's fantastic.
The sailing down the river.
Yes. And I think the flying planes and stuff.
I may have fallen asleep in it. I was little.
Oh my Lord! Well, you go back and rewatch it. It's absolutely worth rewatching.
All right.
Except Robert Redford plays an Englishman, but he just doesn't even try to do the accent. So
He didn't have to. He was so good looking.
yeah. Okay, so I'll give you a brief rundown on the murder, and then we'll just sort of backtrack a bit and talk it through. So the Earl of Erroll, his name is Jocelyn Hay, known as Joss, and he is murdered by being shot twice.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I think he's only shot once. 2 bullets aimed at him, one hits him.
Right.
In his car on the Nairobi Ngong Road, in the middle of basically nowhere, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, on the 24th of January in 1941. He had been he just dropped his fiancée/girlfriend off to her husband's place.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
So hang on. Fiancée/girlfriend.
Well, it was girlfriend, and they just agreed to get married. And
Once she got rid of the husband.
Once the husband knew. And the husband and another woman and Joss Hay and his girlfriend, whose name was Diana Caldwell, but she was Lady Delves Broughton at that point.
Oh, my goodness.
Had all had dinner together that night, and it was all very pleasant.
So the husband's got a girlfriend?
No, there was another woman there.
Oh, okay.
Not girlfriend.
But he knew that
Absolutely
the
knew.
Earl and Diana were doing it.
Yes. Yes. And he had, in fact, said to them very loudly for everybody to hear, make sure you have my wife home by 3 a.m.
Golly gosh, a curfew was imposed,
I
but
think
it
he
didn't
said
matter
it
what.
in a jolly way, ha ha ha, while toasting his champagne. Oh, make sure you have my wife home by 3 a.m.
Different times.
Anyway, by 3:30 a.m. the next morning, Joss Hay, the Earl of Erroll, is dead.
Okay. Do we know where he was shot? In the body?
He was shot in the body, yes, but he was shot in the back, behind his ear, interestingly.
Oh.
Went into his brain, killed him. Yeah, so his car was just found at sort of 4 a.m., just on the side of the road, engine running, lights on. He slumped in it.
Did whoever found him know who he was?
No, he was found by one of the locals who was, I think, going out to do the milking of the cows or something.
Okay.
Within, I think it was 2 months later, Jock Delves Broughton, Lord Delves Broughton, was charged with his murder and went to trial, but was acquitted of the murder.
Okay.
So that's really what we're going to be talking about a bit about the case against Jock Delves Broughton.
And were they taken back to England for trial? Or
No.
It happened in Africa.
Happened in Kenya. So by this stage, it's a fully running colony and has all its own internal structures, including in terms of a parliament. And the prosecutor was actually the Attorney General.
Oh, okay.
And Lord Delves Broughton had his own Queen's Council.
Right.
No, King's Council at that time, who'd come up from South Africa, H.H. Morris, to run the defence very successfully, as it turned out. Mm-hmm. So it's an unsolved murder in the sense that Jock Delves Broughton was acquitted of it, and so there's always been a suggestion of, was he wrongly acquitted or was there somebody else? Now you can read the book White Mischief, which spoiler alert, well, it was been published since 1982, so if you haven't read it by now, it's your fault. Answers that to the extent that he says he thinks it was Lord Delves Broughton who did it.
Oh, wow.
But he got away with it.
Okay.
So I'll talk a little bit about the case later and exactly what the evidence was that came out of trial and whether that was correct or not.
So I know you're going to go into this, but is it that the ballistic evidence would have been the reason for the acquittal?
Correct.
Or he didn't point to a different person doing it?
No. The ballistics evidence, the prosecution case was weak on its ballistic evidence and made one fatal error, which was seized upon by the defence. And we'll talk about that.
The undoing of the prosecution.
The undoing of the prosecution case.
All right, let's get into it.
Yes, okay. All right, so I'll perhaps start with the brief months leading up to the murder, and in that way go back and talk about some of the characters involved, because there are some incredible characters.
Can we
involved.
call them just by their regular names?
Well, I can call. These are lords. I don't want to call them just by their first names. I think that's just.
I think so. We're on first name basis.
Are we?
with them.
Jock. We can call them Jock and Joss. That might
Yeah.
be a bit close to.
All right.
And so he is a 57-year-old. He'd had an interesting life as a lord. I mean, he hadn't worked. He'd gone to Eton, and he hadn't served in the First World War. He'd been in the Irish Guard or something, but when he was about to be shipped out, he had got sunstroke, so he never went to the front.
Sunstroke.
Sunstroke.
Convenient?
I know. Never went to the front.
Look, I say convenient, but I would.
Well, some people said it was all put on. Having said that, he did spend some time in hospital in 1914 or whatever, and anyway, but he never went to the front. But he had a fantastic time as a lord. In fact, he squandered his entire fortune that he inherited.
Oh.
So by 1940, he had squandered his entire inheritance and was in his late 50s, and his first wife, divorced him, left him.
Okay.
She had another man. Having said that it seems that was pretty common. He had other women. She had other men. She ended up deciding that the other men she had were better than him, and she might go off with them. So she did. She divorced him.
These upper classes.
I know.
What?
Well, this idea of sort of an open marriage, if you like, it's in this story seems incredibly common. And you married people for money or for titles, and so long as they were available to dress up and sit next to you at formal dinners,
That's all you needed.
it's pretty much all you needed.
That's a bit sad, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, some days I get up and I think that'd be a great life. Other days I think maybe not.
No, it's empty, really.
Really? Well, the number of people who commit suicide or die from alcoholism in this story there's lots of them.
There you go. They're not happy.
No. So he finds himself in 1940, divorced, not a lot of money, and really looking for something else to do. Now, he had been out to Kenya with his first wife years before, and they'd gone on big game hunting. This was the era of big game hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And he had really enjoyed that. And so he was thinking about going back, I think. But he had a girlfriend, if you like, or a girl that he would hang around with, a much younger woman, Diana Caldwell.
Oh, okay.
And she had a number of beaux, if you like, and she was a party girl, and she had a number of men showing interest in her. And Dels Broughton was the oldest of them, significantly older.
Was she part of the aristocracy?
No, she wasn't.
No.
But she's quite an amazing character. She was a fantastic horse rider, apparently, but was an aviatrix. She was a pilot and used to fly. And so there were occasions where she would get a plane and fly over to Europe, somewhere on the continent, for some great party, stay for a few days, fly back. Because I think this is in the days before, all of the strict rules about airlines and flying and landing. You could just fly anywhere and land anywhere. And
Crazy.
I know. So she was quite an adventurer and just a pretty amazing woman. And so she's in her early 20s. Anyway, Dels Broughton's marriage breaks down. He decides he wants to get married. So he proposes to her and she accepts. Now, she is 26. Yeah, sorry. She's 27. He's 57. So, in fact, Dels Broughton's daughter is the same age as Diana Caldwell.
It's a tale as old as time, Joe.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So they leave England and head out to Kenya because Dels Broughton doesn't have a lot of money and it's cheaper to start up things there. And anyway, they get married in Durban in November of 1940. So Durban in South Africa. They then make their way to Kenya.
It very quickly became an open marriage.
Oh, incredibly quickly. So apparently on the boat on the way out, Dels Broughton says this, whether this is true or not. He accuses her later on in a letter of sleeping with men on the boat on the way out to South Africa. Yeah. And accuses her of doing it as soon as they sort of arrive in Kenya and get settled. I don't know whether that's true or not.
Seriously, who's got the energy for all
I know.
that?
Well, when you're 27, maybe.
Oh, God.
So they arrive in Kenya. They immediately sort of, fall into this set. Now, the set were known as the Happy Valley set because Happy Valley was an area where they all lived. And they were a very fast-moving set. So they're all lords and ladies, not all from England necessarily. So, Karen Blixen's husband was from, where was he? He was from he was Danish or something.
Oh, like a European.
Yeah, but there was French
Okay.
royalty there, aristocracy, plus Americans, so wealthy Americans. It was a real melting pot.
Yeah.
What they did have in common was, well, they were all rich or had come from riches, so they were all used to a certain standard of living. Well, they were happy to engage in a lifestyle which was an enormous amount of alcohol. When you read the story, the amount of alcohol they get through is just phenomenal, but also drugs.
Oh.
Cocaine. So the title of the book about this, called White Mischief, is a play on two things. One, cocaine.
Okay.
But two, also because of the idea of these, these Anglo-Saxons playing up in Kenya. So, and also morphine.
Yeah, I have heard of that before, but as a prescription.
Yeah, certainly there didn't seem to be any rules about it because they would openly shoot up on morphine. Well, it's not all of them, some of them openly.
Well, I don't know. I read something recently that says that the number of drug overdoses in Australia is just growing exponentially.
Really?
Yeah. So I think it's not a problem that we left in the 40s.
No. Although I'm not sure anyone dies of a drug overdose in this. There's some people who die from alcoholism. Oh, that's wrong. No,
had addictions.
Sorry?
They must have had addictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was one description of a woman who is not relevant to the story, but who was in this set, who was known for taking morphine. And the bloke who was giving the description of it was very envious because he would drink all night and, crash in bed at 4 a.m. and be up at 11 with a terrible hangover. And she'd party with them all night and go to bed at 4 a.m. and be up at 8 a.m. perfectly dressed and out playing tennis because she wouldn't have a hangover.
Yeah. I have, anecdotally heard that it is much cheaper to take drugs than to drink alcohol.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not going to test that theory.
Me either, and it terrifies me.
Yeah.
But that was the word on the street. So.
All right, so Diana Caldwell marries Jock Delvesbroughton in November 41, and they move into this very fast-moving set. Now, wife swapping or open marriages, perhaps I should say, very much the thing. And so, as I say, so long as your wife lived in the house with you and, sort of went with you to formal parties, what happened outside of that, so long as it wasn't rubbed in your face, was fine. And the only other sort of rule, if there are any kind of rules in open marriages, was you don't fall in love with other people.
I don't think they're in love with anybody.
No. Yeah.
Not their spouse.
And so it was a bit frowned on to leave your husband/wife and go to whoever you're having the affair with.
Okay, right.
That's sort of not done. Like, by all means, carry on with them in private or even in public, but not too much. And
not for keeps.
And so Jocelyn Hay is already there, already in Kenya. He'd been in Kenya for a long time, 15 years, and he'd really made a life for himself there. So he had left England years before as a 22, 23-year-old. He'd sort of turned his back on a promising career as a diplomat. His father was a famous diplomat. They were aristocracy, but they had no money. So he had a fantastic title, the Earl of Erroll, but no money.
Okay.
So he had to work. But what he did was he just married a rich wife. Unfortunately, she was already married to somebody else, so he had to take her away from that person.
Oh, it wasn't bigamy.
No, she divorced that guy.
Okay.
And then they got married. She was like 28 and he was 22, so an older woman. And they go out to Kenya and they make, they buy a farm. They don't personally do any farming. They,
manage it
and then get involved in this incredibly hedonistic lifestyle. And these parties are described, and you wonder whether the descriptions are true or not, but basically orgies. People all turn up beautifully dressed, have a lovely dinner, and then all, adjourn to some room, and a couple of hours later are just all wife swapping and, yeah.
Wow.
Taking drugs.
That is beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, me too. I'm just like, wow. This is going on in the 20s and 30s. And Jocelyn Hay is incredibly handsome, or if you don't think he's handsome, he's certainly very dashing. I'll just point to the photo of him for you there. But you can, anybody on who wants to look at him, you can just Google him and his photo comes up. He was reputed to just be an absolute star with the women.
Right.
They all loved him.
Very charming.
And very charming, and I think pretty arrogant too, and I think enjoyed.
Is he still with his wife?
Yeah. Oh, his wife was taking on lovers. He was taking on lovers. It was all very open.
Do any of them have children?
No, that's the interesting thing. Very few children in the story. There's only one, Juanita Carberry, who's a 15-year-old, and she's her father, John Carberry, who was this horrible, horrible man.
Because this is also before easily accessible contraception.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe they're all sterile from the drugs.
Yeah, I mean, well, the alcohol, who knows? But amazingly, there's very few children in the story.
Lucky.
Anyway, so that marriage actually ends up failing, not because of infidelity, interestingly, but because she gets sick of Joss Hay spending all her money.
Oh.
So she punts him and moves off back to England and to a better marriage.
Okay.
So she's no longer
the money.
Well, I don't know if the man's called an earl, what's the woman called? A dame? I don't know.
A lady?
Lady of Erroll.
Oh no, that's lords and ladies.
Who even knows? Anyway.
Earless.
The Earless of Erroll. So she goes off to an even better marriage. He stays there. He then marries another woman who is deeply in love with him, who has lots of money.
Oh.
And he then is fine.
So a match made in heaven.
Continues to spend her money. He marries her in 1930. She is dead from alcoholism by 1939. And she had a very sad life because I don't think she partook of the openness of the marriage, and so spent a lot of her last years just at home by herself while he was out drinking herself to death while he was out partying like it's 1999.
Yeah. I go on about how bad drugs are, but actually alcohol is the unspoken scourge.
Oh, absolutely. Now, if you look up Joss Hay online, the Earl of Erroll, he gets a pretty bad rap because the first thing they say about him is that he was a fascist. Okay, so this is 1939, and that's not entirely accurate. I think in 1937 or whatever, he'd gone home for the coronation of King George VI, whoever it was, as the Earl of Erroll I think he had a role to play in the coronation.
Obligation to be there.
And in the process of doing that, had met Sir Oswald Mosley, the British fascist leader, and had been a bit taken with fascism.
I don't think I know what fascism is.
Basically what Hitler was up to, and Mussolini.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah. And so he went back to Kenya and was a bit interested in fascism, but then in the years after that actually turned quite conservative and very anti-fascist, and was actually in the British military and was doing a very good job. He was a member of parliament in Kenya and he was in the military, and he did see some action, I think. The British military did something and he went off with the troops, and he was a very effective administrator. So besides being an absolute cad and womanizer, he was lots of fun, apparently, to be with, incredibly good looking, but also a good administrator and a diligent worker.
So he got over his misspent youth with fascism and contributed usefully.
He was a very useful contributor.
Okay.
By the time he was shot, which is ironic because if they'd sort of shot him 10 years earlier, he probably would have
had a different.
Yeah, he would have just been a wastrel who was spending his wife's money, and and he goes and has affairs with everybody. I mean, he was having affairs anyway, but by 1940, when Lord and Lady Delves Broughton arrive in Nairobi, he's been a widow. His wife passed away, so he's a widower.
Footloose and fancy free.
Footloose and fancy free, and having his affairs left and right. Anyway, they see each other. Apparently she was a great beauty as well, and
Daphne.
Diana. And they very quickly start spending a lot of time together.
Okay.
So just to give you the timeline, so Diana's married to Delves Broughton in November 1940. The murder occurs on the 24th of January 1941.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so they're 3 months into the marriage and she is having a torrid affair.
On top of all the ones from the boat.
Well, that's what her husband, I'm not going to get involved in slut shaming. That came from a letter that he wrote to her later. And I don't know whether it was true or not. So that letter surfaces years later.
Okay.
And yeah.
I don't think I was slut shaming. They were all doing it.
They were all doing it.
I'm just saying she started on the boat.
Some say she started before that, but again, I don't know, because it's hard. I always find it hard to know with these old cases when they say, you know, they often say that so-and-so was her dancing partner and she would go to dinner with a dancing partner. And I'm thinking, is that a metaphor
Euphemism.
for something? Yeah, what is that? Anyway, so she certainly had a lot of admirers. In fact, one admirer who was in the British Army, he got posted to Egypt just so he could be closer to her. And he used to come down to Nairobi all the time.
Oh, my goodness.
And he used to dine with the two of them. You know, the Lord Dells Broughton, Lady Del Broughton, and this hanger-on, like the third wheel.
It sounds like Lord Del Broughton was quite tolerant.
Well, he was. Well, he was so tolerant, in fact, that they had an arrangement that if she met a younger man that she fell in love with, she could divorce him and go off with the younger man, and he would pay her £5,000 a year for 5 years.
What?
So he factored that into their marriage. I think he just enjoyed having company, and I mean, I'm sure he enjoyed some.
But then that would have to put some kind of doubt over any motive he would have had to kill.
Exactly.
Couldn't care less, really, by the sounds of it.
Yes. Well, that really that's what it comes down to. What kind of a man is he? Was he going to honour that? Was he not going to honour that? Was he just saying that to a younger wife to make her feel like she wasn't sort of hemmed in?
Well, and so hang on, if we come back to the letter that said she was sleeping with people on the boat, who was that letter to?
So that was to her. So after Dells Broughton is acquitted, he spends a little bit more time in Africa, but he's effectively ostracised by everyone. He ends up going, and Diana Caldwell then takes up with another man. And so Lord Dells Broughton heads back to London. But while in London, he's trying to get her to come back to him. So she writes him, and it was a bit of a poison pen letter, saying how horrible she was in the 3 months that they were married.
Right, so it wasn't like a pre-existing letter.
No.
Okay.
And it was sent at a time when relations between them were very bad.
Acrimonious.
Yes, acrimonious, correct.
All right. Sorry, continue.
No, that's right. So Joss Hay and Diana Caldwell, or Lady Dells Broughton, are carrying on this torrid affair. And that's fine. It's within the bounds of marriage, but it started to become a bit too in your face.
Full on.
And Jock Dells Broughton gets a few. So a lot of this occurs at a place called the Mutega Club. And I really want to go to the Mutega Club. It still exists. I've looked it up. So it's the club in Nairobi where all of these, colonials would go, and they would, they'd basically be there every single day drinking.
Not where they were having the orgies.
And having, not orgies, but there was accommodation there, so you could nip off to one of the rooms and.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, although there was a story of Joss Hay not even bothering to go to a room, just off into the billiard room.
Sure.
Caught by the maitre d'.
Oh, Lord.
And it was one of those classic English clubs where they would all get drunk, carry on terribly, smash things, break furniture, and then the next morning the maitre d' would just go around and give them all a little chit about how much money they owed for all of the stuff they'd broken.
Oh, my goodness.
And they'd just all pay that, and they'd get a whole lot of new furniture. And yeah.
Did I tell you at our wedding?
No.
It was at Tattersalls in Brisbane.
Tattersalls Club, another lovely club.
They had little polo men statues.
Yes.
And we got a bill after the wedding for a broken polo statue. And we were like, gosh, wonder who did that. And we'd also had cameras on all of the tables to take photos for the guests.
Back before smartphones, yes.
And when we got them developed, one of David's mates was shaking hands with the polo man in the photo, and then the hand was up. So we found out who did it.
Did you send him the bill?
No.
So this all occurs at the Mutega Club. It's really central to the story because this is where they all meet and this is where they all see each other. And who was where at what time, is all about who's at the Mutega Club. So Joss Hay is carrying on with Diana Caldwell. A lot of it happens at the Mutega Club. He actually lives on the grounds of the Mutega Club because he's got no money and it's cheap accommodation.
Is he being faithful to her at that time, or is he spreading himself around?
At the start, he wasn't. He left an affair with a woman to go to her, but I think there was a bit of crossover.
Okay.
Depending on who you talk to, some people say they were both in love with each other. Some people say Joss was absolutely in love with Diana and she was sort of thought he was okay. And then other people say Diana was absolutely in love with Joss and he was sort of, yeah, she's all right.
Right.
Hard to know who to believe. Having said that, Diana Caldwell years and years later in an interview said that she was absolutely in love with him.
Okay.
And it was the sort of first real love of her life. Anyway, but it's all occurring quickly in this sort of hothouse environment. Anyway, so it's brought to the attention of Delves Broughton, initially through anonymous letters put in his pigeonhole at the club.
What?
Saying, Lord Earl of Erroll's carrying on with your wife. Are you going to do something about it? Yeah, he got 3 of these notes. I think one of them ended up being an evidence of the trial because they wanted to know who was putting these notes in his, and it was saying, what are you going to do about it and this kind of stuff. Almost
like an Agatha Christie.
It is a bit, yeah. And I think the received wisdom is that it was a woman. It was one of the wives of one of the older couples who was a bit of a matron.
Oh, frowned upon.
And frowned upon this kind of carry on, was the one who was doing it. Anyway, Jock Delves Broughton finds out about it, speaks to them both about it, and we're together. I don't think at the start they sort of declared they were definitely in love and we're going to be running off together. And so, in the spirit of the times, he sort of was fine, but then later on it became clear that they were probably in love and they were going to run away together. The problem is Joss Hay had no money. And so people were saying...
his second wife's money?
Yeah, I think she took all that with him.
No, she died.
Yeah. Well, I think it was probably entailed in a trust. They often tied up these fortunes.
Well, maybe she drank it.
Well, she drank it all. He has no money. So if Diana Caldwell goes with Joss Hay, they've got no money. And so some of the ladies were pulling Diana Caldwell aside saying, listen, I know this is great and you're having lots of fun, but realistically, he's got no money. What are you? You can't live the Mottega Club lifestyle on what he's earning.
Which is possibly a good thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It sounded fantastic.
Sounds shocking.
They would drink and party and then be up at 8, 9 a.m. playing croquet and tennis and then do it all again.
No, that would get old pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, Joss Hay had been doing it for like 15 years.
Crazy.
Just loving it. In the end, there's some serious talks both with Joss Hay and with Diana Caldwell, but from a number of people saying, listen, what's going on with this relationship? So
everybody knew.
Either leave him, either leave Delves Broughton and marry or finish it. Just cut it off. It's just too much. So Joss Hay and Diana decide that they're going to get married. And they have, and at all these times they would have dinners at the Mottega Club, all of them together. Joss Hay would be there, Diana Caldwell there, Jock Delves Broughton. They're all having this.
So bizarre.
Other people, and they're all sitting at the table having this great convivial dinners. Yeah.
So bizarre.
Anyway, so it all comes out. They decided, look, we're going to get married. On the night, so I suppose Joss Hay's killed at 3 a.m. The night before that, they were all at the dinner at the Mottega Club. They've all finally made the decision, or Joss and Diana have made the decision they're going to leave and get married together. And that's sort of been hanging in the air. They've finally communicated that to Jock Delves Broughton, and he says, okay, fine, good luck to you, thumbs up. He had been a bit...
Tally-ho.
Yeah, tally-ho. He had been a bit cranky about it, and he had been arguing with Diana about particularly the family pearls that he had, or some pearls that she had, and whether she would...
it all comes down to money.
Yeah. So anyway, but he had suddenly, very quickly... become okay with everything, and later on people were a bit suspicious of that. And so he's heard loudly proclaiming as Diana and Jock are leaving the Mottega Club, have my wife back by 3 a.m. We've got an early start in the morning or something.
Right.
And so Jock and Diana leave. I think they go back to his bungalow at the Mottega Club.
Oh, my God.
Jock Delves Broughton and this other woman who he was with, they then stay there drinking for another few hours. Then they go off to another club. Anyway, they end up sort of arriving home at sort of 2:30. And this other woman is a friend of Diana Caldwell's and is staying at their house. And so...
Was she involved with Jock?
She wasn't involved with Jock, but no, not. I don't think they were in a relationship. But there is a question because what then occurs at the house is all reliant on her testimony, and Jock Delves Broughton getting an alibi is really reliant on her testimony.
Right.
So she says that she got home with Jock, had a discussion with him. He then went off to his bedroom. She then went to her room, and Diana comes to her room, sits in her room at like 3 a.m. and they have a discussion for 20 minutes. Then Diana leaves. Then Jock comes back 20 minutes after that and says, "You are right. Are you,
to her room?"
To her room.
Mm-hmm.
And so it puts Jock in the house at sort of 3 a.m. and then at about 3:40 or something like that. But only based on what she says.
And was she drunk?
I think they were all drunk. Everybody seems to be permanently drunk in this story. Last time Joss Hay is seen alive is when he drops off Diana. Drops her to the front door. She goes in. He's seen by the servants. She's seen by the maid, and the maid had been brought from England for the job. She was one of their trusted sort of servants.
So this is about 3 a.m.
Yeah, about 3 a.m. Got her home just on time, right on the curfew. And he then gets back in his car and he drives off. And the last thing Diana says to him is, "Drive safely," because he was a very fast driver apparently. And he responds, "I will drive safely, but I will drive quickly," or something like that.
Right.
Speeds off in his car.
How far did he get?
He got 2.5 miles.
Like 5 kilometres?
Yeah, I meant to look that up. I think it's probably about 4.
4-point-something kilometres.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He gets 2.5 miles and then we don't know what happened, but his car is found running, lights on, slightly off the road into a bit of a ditch, and he is slumped in an odd position in the well of the sort of the driver's seat.
Okay.
Nobody knows what's happened to him. So the police case is this, that Delves Broughton leaves the house. I think they say he gets into the back of the car while Joss is dropping off Diana.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Hides in the back of the car. Joss gets in, drives off. When he's down the road, sits up, puts a gun to the back of his head. So the bullet wound is behind the ear into the brain, fires the gun. Now, the downside to that is there's actually 2 shots because there's a bullet that hits the frame of the window in the car, as well as the one that goes into his head. So the person fires 2 shots. So if you are putting a gun to someone's head and firing at point blank range, what's the second shot for?
Yeah, okay.
They knew it was that the shot had come from quite close because there's powder burns on the wound. And I haven't looked at these because I'm not into gruesome pictures, but apparently you can see these photographs on the internet.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So the other idea was that he had paid somebody else to do it, and they had flagged down Joss as he drove along, and then reached in the car and shot him at close range in the head. But
still, what's the second?
Well, I mean, I suppose if you're standing outside the car firing in, you might let 2 shots off because you're a bit further away. You want to make sure of it. And I suppose you pull out a gun and he then sees it's a gun and he starts to drive off or whatever. You've got to...
Would they have all been quite proficient with guns? Like, was hunting a regular pastime? Good
question. Hunting was a regular pastime. You generally do hunting with rifles, not pistols.
Right.
So they determined that this was a .32 caliber pistol, and they say it was a Colt revolver because that's the gun that Jock Delves Broughton had.
Oh, handy.
Yes.
Okay.
And there was some evidence that Jock Delves Broughton was a terrible shot. So there had been a luncheon party a couple of weeks before where they'd all got full and gone out and fired at some, targets for fun.
I don't know if you can judge someone's ability to shoot properly if they're drunk.
As I say, people in the story seem to be permanently drunk, so I'm not sure there was a point where they were sober. But apparently he had a bit of one of his hands was a bit deformed or something, and so he couldn't properly hold a gun.
So there's your first shot.
Yeah, that could be the first shot. But again, if you know that, presumably you're holding the gun in your other hand. I mean...
But then you'd have to be reaching across to shoot
him
behind the ear.
Yeah, behind the ear.
Like, it'd make more sense to sit behind and just...
And the other problem with a number of problems with the prosecution case. One of the problems is that he's got to get back to the house in the time. between sort of 3 a.m. and 3:40 or whatever. But that's assuming you believe the woman who said she came into his room. So she could have just been providing him with an alibi. Because they were good friends.
Sure.
Or not being sure.
Yeah.
And he had a club foot as well. And
Jock.
so the Lord Delves Broughton had a club foot, or not a club foot, he had some kind of deformed foot, and so he wasn't a great walker. Oh, sorry. They said he couldn't have covered the 2.5 miles in the required time. The problem was that when he was in jail, so he gets arrested 2 months later and they put him in jail, and he's allowed a lot of privileges. One of those privileges is he's allowed out every day for a walk. And so he goes for a long walk every day for 2 hours.
Oh.
Apparently has no
totally
problems
fine.
with it. Yeah, totally fine. So
that was a bit short-sighted of him.
Well, no, they don't sort of mention that at the trial.
Oh.
He runs this line that he couldn't have done it because of his deformed
And no
foot.
one says, what about your walks in prison?
Yeah, you seem to do it right in prison, mate.
Interesting.
So the main prosecution case is all about the gun. So, and this is what I want to say about ballistics evidence. Ballistics evidence is mostly about identification. It's identifying who the killer is via the gun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's exactly this case. They say Jock Delves Broughton has a Colt revolving .32 pistol. Joss Hay is shot with a .32 caliber pistol. They know that because they get the bullet out of his head.
Yep.
And they're the same gun. Now, so they've got to be able to say from this tiny bit of metal, the bullet, that it was shot from a Colt revolver as opposed to any other pistol.
So are there lots of 3.2 types of
calibers? Yes.
Okay.
So I mean, Colt is just the name of the manufacturer.
Yeah.
There's lots of other
Ruger,
I suppose. Smith and Wesson, who knows? Whatever. I don't know.
Something starting with W.
Yeah.
Waltham.
So what they've got to do is they've got to get the bullet, and they've got to look at the bullet, and they've got to say that was fired by a Colt. Now, often what they do in these kind of ballistics cases is they match the bullet to the gun because they have the gun. And they say this gun fired that bullet, and they say that because of some, idiosyncrasy, markings on the bullet, and a sort of a corresponding marking on the gun.
Yeah.
Now, they don't have the gun because a couple of days before the murder, Jock Delves Broughton reports his gun stolen and files a police report saying the gun's stolen.
All right.
So the prosecution say that that's a ruse to try and show that he didn't have this gun, which he shot Joss Hay with. I think guns were pretty prevalent. If you wanted to get a gun that nobody knew you had, I don't think it would have been too hard.
That's a high degree of premeditation.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they say that this was all premeditated, and that his change of behaviour to say, he was fine with Joss and Dana going off together was all a ruse. And his very public protestations about have my wife home by 3 a.m, was all fake to make people think he was all right with the relationship where really he wasn't.
I think it would be an unusual man or woman who would be okay with that carry on by their spouse.
Yeah.
So publicly, so full on, and so soon into a marriage. Yes.
I feel the same, but I just wonder what it was like in that period, in that place where sort of open marriages were that's what everybody did.
But I suppose if she was so much younger, 27, it's not like she was a child bride, but, she was probably someone he thought maybe was not within his, reach.
I think there's some evidence of that, and I think that whole marriage contract they have where she could, if she fell in love with someone, she could go and he would give her money, I think was part of that. He realised that she was, he really was a bit old for her, and he wanted sort of some companionship, and she was beautiful, and why wouldn't you want to have a beautiful woman on your arm? But he wanted to sort of make it easy for her. I mean, if that's the case, he probably just didn't suspect that it would occur so quickly and so publicly. I
feel like maybe it was all a big ruse and he was very jealous.
So the problem they have with the gun, and this is what the H.H. Morris KC immediately realises, who apparently was an expert on ballistics.
Oh, convenient.
Is that the rifling, so the bullet has marks on it to show the rifling in the barrel. So a gun barrel is rifled, i.e. it has these swirly lines that run all the way down the barrel. Because what they found in the development of guns is that, back in the day, the old musket, it was a round ball that you put into a metal pipe and used gunpowder to blow it out of the pipe at an enormous rate of knots.
Yeah.
The problem is that round balls didn't fly straight. They flew in a funny sort of a pattern, and so they were quite inaccurate.
Okay.
At some point in the early 19th century, somebody works out that if you rifled the inside of the barrel, so you put this swirling pattern all the way down the barrel, and you shaped the bullet more like what they're shaped like, say, not round. Yeah, the bullet would then spin as it went down the barrel, and it would come out the other end, and it would continue to spin, and it would fly straight. And so you immediately got it. It was more accurate.
Okay.
So that they say, okay, so this bullet is fired from a gun that has 5 stripes of rifling down the barrel in a clockwise direction.
Yes.
The problem was that the Colt revolver, they said that had shot it, has 6 lines of rifling, and it runs anti-clockwise.
Like all of those Colts?
All of those Colts, because they're all manufactured by machines.
So it couldn't have been a Colt?
Yeah, they're not handmade. They're all exactly the same.
And the police just missed that?
They must have just missed it. They had expert evidence and everything, and apparently the trial was bored for days and days about this, ballistics evidence. But they had just missed it.
That is weird.
Isn't it? And so the H.H. Morris just dropped the mic. Couldn't have been far from a Colt. I'm out. See, I'm going back to Durban or whatever. Yeah. I think it was probably a nearer run thing than that. Apparently, Jock Dels Broughton, who was not a particularly, he was a sort of an all right guy. Apparently, he did fantastically under cross-examination.
Oh, wow.
Cross-examined for 3 days. Absolutely.
3 days?
Yeah, didn't put a foot wrong. Just was awesome. Which is amazing because when you read everything else about what kind of a guy he was, you thought this guy would be terrible in cross-examination. For whatever reason, he just gave the performance of his life.
Did he have a little hip flask?
Yeah, I know. Well, he'd probably been sober for a while then because he'd been in jail for months.
Okay.
Yeah. So he gets acquitted, unbelievably. And it really turns on this, no pun intended because of the rifling, it really turns on this idea that they got the ballistic evidence so terribly wrong.
I can't understand what the prosecution were doing there.
I know. But do you know what the annoying thing is? I find this annoying. They never looked at anyone else. They initially thought that this woman, whose name is, she's got a fantastic name, Alice de Jonze. She was an American heiress to a fortune. She married a French count, Frederick de Jonze, again, as a 22-year-old. And then within a couple of years is having an affair with a guy who she falls in love with. They decide to break up. This is in the 20s. And she's so upset by it. She shoots him and then shoots herself.
Oh.
Both of them survive. She's put on trial.
Talk about a bad shot.
I know. Well, she shoots him in the stomach and herself in the stomach. Okay. What? She survives. She's charged with the the shooting and convicted, and she is given a fine, a small fine, and then she's pardoned by the French state. And then crazily goes on to marry that guy.
Okay.
Bizarre. Anyway, she had been in and out of Kenya. At the time in 1941, she'd been in Kenya for a couple of years, and she had been having an affair with Joss Hay.
He was busy.
He was. And so as soon as there was a shooting, everyone's like, it's probably Alice de Jonze. She likes to shoot people.
Well, and the 2 shots could be explained there.
I know.
She's not very good.
It's not a good shot. She had an alibi. Guess what it was? She was sleeping with someone else's husband.
Of course she was.
Yeah.
Wow.
So she gets ruled.
Seriously.
Yeah. So she gets ruled out pretty quickly. But within the year, she has died. She has committed suicide by drug overdose.
Wow.
Jock Dels Broughton is acquitted. He and Diana then go on a long trip through India, come back and try and live in Kenya, and they're just ostracised.
Oh, she stayed with him?
Yes, unbelievably. She didn't want to, but she does.
Wow.
Well, I mean, she doesn't have any money. Where can she go? She's sort of trapped a bit.
Just go to the next person.
Well, she does. So when they get back to Kenya, she then marries the guy who is the richest landowner in. They buy the farm next door. She becomes friends with him. She then marries him.
Classic tale. Yeah. The farm next door.
And Jock Dels Broughton goes back to England. He commits suicide. So by the end of 41, he's dead.
Gone.
Yes.
That is a tragedy,
isn't it?
The whole thing is messed up.
Diana Corwell does even better. She then marries Lord Delamere. Third marriage, becomes Lady Delamere, super successful marriage, totally in love, have a great marriage for 40 years till he dies. She becomes the wealthiest woman in Kenya because the wealthy guy who was her second marriage, he doesn't have any other wives. He leaves all his entire fortune to her. She's independently wealthy.
Very well.
And then she marries the second wealthiest guy.
Did she have children?
No, I don't think she had any. Oh, that's wrong. Sorry, I think she had a daughter.
Right.
Yeah, I think they had a daughter. She lives her entire life in Kenya.
Oh, my goodness.
I know.
I wonder if she was always secretly mourning Joss.
I think she probably might have been. She certainly said in that interview in the late 70s, early 80s, that she had two people who she actually loved in her entire life. One was Joss Hay and the other was Lord Delamere, her third husband.
So Jock never made a deathbed confession or...
No, he didn't.
No.
But a lot of stuff came out that he had been involved in insurance fraud.
Oh.
In terms of saying things had been stolen when they hadn't.
Like the gun.
Like the gun. Although he didn't claim money for that. He'd claim money for some early ones to get out of some financial difficulties.
Shows, what do they call that? Propensity
Propensity.
evidence?
Yeah, that he's prepared to be dishonest.
Yeah.
So in the end, and Diana Caldwell absolutely thought he did it. And so she then had to spend travelling through India with the guy who had murdered.
Suspected murderer.
Yes.
I tell you what, if that was not a salutary lesson for the prosecution in terms of let's just check our ballistics evidence.
Yes.
Then what is?
Yes. I know.
That is insane.
I know. Well, ballistics evidence ended up forming a very small part of that podcast, but it's because it's such an incredible story. But if you want to watch the movie from 1987, it has Charles Dance in it. So Charles Dance, he has recently appeared in Game of Thrones as the old, Targaryen father or whatever.
No,
he is.
I think I'm the only person in Australia who's never watched an episode of Game of Thrones.
Well, in 1987, he's this tall, dashingly handsome young Englishman, and he plays a tall, dashingly handsome young Englishman. And Greta Scacchi plays the Diana Caldwell.
Ah,
yeah.
All right.
So it's definitely worth watching if people have got nothing to do on a Friday night.
You do find some good tales to tell.
Yeah.
That was full of debauchery.
Full of debauchery, absolutely it was.
Just out of control.
Yeah.
I do feel sorry for Joss.
I do too. He was he'd just turned the corner. He was really on the verge of a fantastic life.
Well, I mean, I feel most sorry for his wife, I think, who he left at home to drink herself to death.
That was his second wife.
Yeah.
Yes, very sad.
Gosh, I'm glad I did not live
in 1920s, 30s, 40s
in Kenya.
Kenya, yeah. Okay.
Or amongst the aristocracy more so.
Yeah. I felt like that some days, and then other days I'm like, no, that would have been fun.
No, I would not have fit in. I would have been the wife drinking herself to death at home.
All right. Thanks, Lizzie.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you for listening to the episode. If you enjoyed it, please rate and review or like and subscribe. It all helps Lizzie and I keep this podcast going. If you're interested in clips, you can look at them on Instagram and TikTok. Just search for Justice Matters Pod. See you next episode.